There is a question that follows Ilia Topuria everywhere he goes, and it is one he has never been able to give a simple answer to. People ask him where he is from, and the honest truth is that the answer depends on what you mean by from. It depends on whether you mean where he was born, where he was raised, where he trained, where he became who he is, or where his blood runs deepest. Because the remarkable thing about Ilia Topuria, the thing that separates his story from almost every other fighter in the history of mixed martial arts, is that the answer to that question is genuinely, authentically complicated. He is not being evasive. He is not trying to brand himself as a citizen of the world for marketing purposes. He was born in Germany. He grew up in Georgia. He became a man in Spain. And he became a champion for all three. That is not a metaphor. That is his actual biography. And when you really sit with it, when you understand what his family went through just to give him the chance to exist in relative safety and stability, you start to understand that the belt around his waist represents something far more profound than just athletic achievement. It represents survival. It represents a family's refusal to be broken. And it represents one young man's absolute, iron-willed determination to turn a childhood built on displacement into a legacy built on dominance. Ilia Topuria was born on January 21, 1997, in Halle, Germany, to Georgian parents. Now, at first glance, that sentence might not strike you as particularly remarkable. Lots of people are born in one country and grow up in another. But the reason his parents were in Germany is where the real story begins. And it is a story rooted in one of the most painful and underreported conflicts of the post-Soviet era. His parents had left Abkhazia because of conflict. A conflict that tore apart families, erased communities, and sent hundreds of thousands of ethnic Georgians fleeing from a region that had been their home for generations. Abkhazia, for those who may not know, is a breakaway territory in northwestern Georgia. In the early 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, a brutal war erupted there between Abkhazian separatists backed by Russia and the Georgian government. The result was a catastrophe for the Georgian civilian population. Somewhere between 200,000 and 250,000 ethnic Georgians were driven from their homes. As a young child, Ilia moved to Georgia, where he started training in Greco-Roman wrestling. His first contact with combat sports was at school, where he and his brother Alex began practicing Greco-Roman wrestling together.
We went to Georgia. We kept practicing with the Greco-Roman wrestling, and then we moved to Spain when I was 15 years old, and completely by chance we find the gym and we started training the MMA.
Now, you have to understand what Greco-Roman wrestling means in Georgia. It is not just a sport. It is a cultural cornerstone, a form of national identity, something that Georgian boys learn the way other children learn to read. Georgia has one of the richest wrestling traditions in the world. The country has produced Olympic champions, world champions, legends of the mat. When young Ilia started wrestling, he was not just picking up a hobby. He was plugging himself into something ancient and alive, something that connected him to his Georgian heritage in the most physical and primal way possible. And he was good at it. The kind of good that makes coaches look twice. The kind of good that makes other kids on the mat nervous. Those are lessons that would follow him into the Octagon 20 years later, and that would form the invisible foundation beneath every knockout, every submission, every perfectly timed finish of his professional career. But stability, for the Topuria family, was never something they could take for granted. When he was 15, the 2008 conflict between Russia and Georgia that shocked the world and lasted only 5 days, but left a generation of Georgians with a renewed sense of vulnerability and uncertainty about their future. The Topuria family made the decision. They packed up what they had They moved again, and they started over. In Spain, in Alicante, in a city where nobody knew their name, where the language was completely foreign, where nothing was familiar, and everything had to be rebuilt from scratch. Most teenagers, faced with that kind of upheaval, would struggle enormously. The social dislocation alone, arriving somewhere new, where you cannot even communicate basic needs, would be enough to knock most people sideways. But Ilia Topuria was not most teenagers. He had been preparing for disruption his whole life. He had learned, through watching his family, that you do not get to choose your circumstances. You only get to choose how you respond to them.
But wait, so when you were born in Germany though, right?
Yeah. I born in Germany. I lived there for 7 years, and then we moved to Georgia, and since 7 to 15, I was living there. You know, we were living in Georgia, and on that time in Georgia, there was a little bit of bad situation, you know, and my parents decided to move to Spain, and I think that's why. And I was a kid, you know, I didn't have any decisions.
He moved to Spain as a teenager and began training at the Climate Club, the gym that would oversee his development and training for years to come.
And my dad and my mom, they started to convince us, like, there's a gym, they are practicing like jiu-jitsu, MMA, all the sports. And I was like, I don't know what's this. And my dad started to show me the videos of the Gracies. He told me, like, this is one of the best sports in the world right now. You are gonna guys love it, this and that. And at that day, we went to the gym, and I felt in love since the first second.
The Climate Club in Alicante was founded by Argentinian brothers Jorge and Agustin Clement, who had introduced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to the region. They spotted the potential in the young Georgian teenager who walked through their doors, and Topuria trained there for more than a decade. It is one of those beautiful accidents of geography and timing that seems almost cinematic in retrospect.
I'm very good with the wrestling. I can take people down, I can control them, I have a great ground game. But what if I go to the highest competition and I find some adversities? I have to be able to fight in the striking also. So I have to develop my game in the striking. And I start from that. And I start with my brother. We were like the first people to go inside the gym and the last ones to leave it.
A displaced Georgian teenager walks into a gym run by Argentinian brothers in southeastern Spain and finds the place where he will become a world champion. The Climate brothers saw in Ilia what great coaches always see in great fighters, not just physical ability, though the physical ability was obvious, but something rarer and harder to quantify. They saw hunger. They saw the particular intensity of someone who has something to prove not just to the world, but to himself. They saw a young man who had been knocked around by circumstance his whole life, and who had decided, quietly but firmly, that he was done being moved by forces outside his control. From now on, he would be the one doing the moving. His martial arts education was already formidable by the time he arrived in Spain. He had started with jiu-jitsu because his father got him involved, and his training over the years encompassed BJJ, taekwondo, kickboxing, wrestling, and boxing. That is a genuinely rare combination of disciplines for a young athlete to have absorbed, and the way those influences weave together in his fighting style is one of the things that makes him so uniquely difficult to deal with as an opponent. His wrestling gives him world-class takedown defense and the ability to control where a fight takes place. His jiu-jitsu gives him the technical ground game to finish opponents if the fight goes to the mat. His striking, which would evolve dramatically over the course of his career, developed into something precise, patient, and devastatingly powerful.
Yes, but I left the school when I was like 15 years old.
Oh, what do you mean? You didn't go to school?
No.
What?
Because when I was 15 years old, I go with my brother to talk to my father, and we tell him like, hey, Dad, we don't want to go to school anymore, but we really want to train, and we're going to go like all day, every day in the gym, and we're gonna train because my dream was to get to fight in the UFC. And he told me, like, if you're really gonna train all the time and like you tell me, you have my approval.
Wow, what a guy.
Yeah.
Topuria began his professional MMA career at the age of 18, debuting with a submission victory over Francisco Javier Asprilla in April 2015 in Valencia, Spain. It was a quiet beginning, as most great careers are. Nobody outside of the local Spanish MMA scene was paying much attention. He was just another promising young fighter working his way through regional competition, building his record, learning what it meant to fight with something real on the line. But the wins kept coming. And when you stop people consistently, when you demonstrate that finishing ability time and time again across different opponents with different styles, eventually the MMA world cannot ignore you anymore. He won the vacant MFE featherweight title before competing in both Cage Warriors and the Brave Combat Federation. Each step up in competition was handled with the same calm efficiency. Each new level of opponent was analyzed, prepared for, and overcome. He won the Cage Warriors bantamweight title fight in less than 2 minutes, a result that announced him to the European MMA community as something genuinely special. And through all of this, his story was spreading. People were starting to ask who this Georgian Spanish kid was, where he had come from, why they had never heard of him before. The answer, of course, was that he had been there all along. He had just been doing the work, quietly, in the gyms of Alicante, without fanfare or platform, building himself into something extraordinary, while the MMA world was looking elsewhere. In 2020, Topuria officially signed with the UFC and won his first 6 fights in the promotion. His UFC debut came on short notice. Most fighters offered a short notice fight in their UFC debut would be forgiven for hesitating. Ilia Topuria said yes without blinking. And he won. And then he kept winning. Fight after fight, the pattern was the same. He would enter the octagon, he would impose his will on the bout, and somewhere before the final bell, the fight would be over. His finishing instinct is one of those things that is genuinely hard to explain to someone who has not watched him fight. There is a moment in every Topuria fight where you can almost see it click, where his opponent makes a small mistake or leaves a fractional opening, and Topuria recognizes it before anyone else in the arena does, and the hand goes out, and the night is over. His UFC highlights include notable victories over Jai Herbert, Bryce Mitchell, and Josh Emmett, fights that demonstrated his range and his ability to win in completely different ways against completely different styles. The Herbert fight showed his striking power. The Bryce Mitchell fight, which ended with a technical arm triangle choke, showed his ground game. The Josh Emmett fight, a 5-round unanimous decision over one of the most durable and dangerous fighters in the division, showed something arguably more important: his championship composure, his ability to sustain excellence across 5 rounds against an elite opponent, his readiness for the biggest stages. After the Emmett fight, there was really no credible argument left for keeping Ilia Topuria out of a title fight. On February 17, 2024, Topuria shocked the MMA world at UFC 298 when he knocked out Alexander Volkanovski in the 2nd round to become UFC featherweight champion. Alexander Volkanovski, for those who may need a reminder, was considered by many analysts and fans to be the greatest featherweight fighter of all time. He had been champion for years. He had defended the belt against every challenger thrown at him. He had beaten Max Holloway twice. He had gone to lightweight and nearly beaten Islam Makhachev for that championship too. He was universally respected, universally feared, and widely believed to be simply too experienced, too technically complete, and too mentally tough to be finished. Ilia Topuria knocked him out cold in round 2. The performance earned Topuria the Performance of the Night award and made him the first Georgian and Spanish fighter to win a UFC championship. 2 countries, 1 fighter, 1 belt, one absolutely stunning moment. On October 26, 2024, at UFC 308, Topuria defended his UFC featherweight championship against former champion Max Holloway, winning by knockout in the 3rd round, the first knockout loss of Holloway's career. Max Holloway is one of the most beloved fighters in the history of the sport. He has an almost supernatural chin. In dozens of professional fights across his entire career, nobody had ever stopped him by strikes. Nobody. And Ilia Topuria did it in the 3rd round, with the kind of clinical precision that reminded you that he is not simply a powerful puncher, he is a smart, calculating, composed finisher who puts the pieces together inside the cage in real time with a level of tactical intelligence that is genuinely rare. He also faced then BMF belt champion Max Holloway in that bout, though the BMF title was not on the line as Holloway chose not to defend it. 2 defenses, 2 knockouts, 2 legends of the division finished. The question at that point was not whether Ilia Topuria was the best featherweight on the planet. The question was whether he was about to become something even bigger. The answer came in early 2025. On February 19, 2025, it was announced that Topuria would vacate his featherweight title, with UFC President Dana White citing difficulties cutting weight, a lack of interest in the division's competition, and a desire to move up to lightweight permanently. He had conquered featherweight. He wanted lightweight. He wanted the hardest thing available to him. He wanted to be tested in a way that the featherweight division could no longer provide. On June 28, 2025, at UFC 317, Topuria knocked out Charles Oliveira at 2:27 of the 1st round to win the vacant UFC lightweight championship, making him the 10th multi-division champion in UFC history. Charles Oliveira is not a stepping stone. Oliveira is a former lightweight champion with the most submission finishes in UFC history. He is one of the most dangerous ground fighters the sport has ever seen. A man who has been knocked down and finished fights from the bottom. A man who has won in ways that defy conventional explanation and who has become, over the course of a long and storied career, one of MMA's most beloved and respected competitors. Ilia Topuria knocked him out in 2 minutes and 27 seconds. He became the first fighter in UFC history to become a 2-time undefeated champion, having captured the featherweight and lightweight titles while remaining undefeated throughout his entire professional career. Read that again. Undefeated. 2 divisions, 2 championships. Not a single loss in 17 professional fights. No other fighter in the history of the UFC has ever done that. Not even close. Now let us go back, because records and championships are only part of what makes Ilia Topuria remarkable. What makes him genuinely singular, what makes his story worth telling and retelling and studying, is that line he said, the line that has become, in many ways, the emotional core of everything he represents. He said, "You cut me, and my blood is Georgian, but my heart is Spanish." That line is not just quotable, it is profound. It encapsulates an experience of identity that millions of people around the world share, but rarely get to see expressed with such clarity and grace. He is not choosing between his identities. He is not ranking them. He is holding them both, simultaneously, with equal love and equal pride. His blood, his ancestry, his family, the sacrifice of the people who came before him, the culture that shaped his values and his discipline and his relationship to combat. That is Georgian, irreducibly and permanently. But his heart, the place where his daily life happened, where his friendships formed, where his dreams took shape, where his body learned to fight, and his character learned to compete. That is Spanish. He became a champion for both. He carries both flags without apology and without conflict. And in a world that so often demands that people choose a side, that they simplify their identity into something easy to categorize and understand, Ilia Topuria refuses. In 2024, the president of Georgia awarded him the Order of Honor at Orbiliani Palace in Tbilisi. That same day, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze announced that the government would ensure Ilia retains his Georgian citizenship, making him a dual citizen of both Georgia and Spain. Think about what that moment represents. A man whose family were refugees from Georgian territory, displaced by conflict, forced to rebuild their lives twice before their son was old enough to understand why. That man's son standing in a palace in Tbilisi, while the president of the country drapes an honor around his neck. A refugee family's son becoming a national hero. You cannot write something more powerful than that. His nickname, El Matador, reflects his admiration for bullfighting and his approach to fighting as an artist in the Octagon. It is perfectly chosen. A matador is not simply someone who is aggressive. A matador is someone who controls the ring, who understands the rhythm of combat, who is patient and precise, and who delivers the final blow only when the moment is exactly right. That is Ilia Topuria in the Octagon. He does not rush, he does not panic, he reads his opponent, absorbs information, adjusts, and then, when the opening appears, and it always appears, because no fighter is perfect, and Topuria is watching for the imperfection the way a hawk watches for movement in the grass, he delivers. Clean, decisive, final. As his profile grew, Topuria relocated to Madrid, and in 2025, he and his brother parted ways with Clement Club to establish their own training base in the capital. The split was described by both parties as mutual and respectful. Jorge Clement's own words captured it well. We go with him on the journey, and now he grows, and he wants to fly away. We are very proud. That farewell from his longtime coaches tells you something important about Ilia Topuria that statistics never can. As of late 2025, he sits at number 2 in the UFC men's pound-for-pound rankings, which means that the MMA community regards him as the second-best fighter on the planet, regardless of weight class. He is undefeated in 17 professional fights. He holds wins over 3 former UFC world champions, Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, and Charles Oliveira, all finished by knockout. He is the only fighter in UFC history to become a 2-division champion without ever losing a professional fight. And he is still only in his late 20s. His peak, by most reasonable assessments, has not yet arrived. He is still growing, still improving, still finding new levels in his game that suggest the best of Ilia Topuria may be something none of us have seen yet. So we come back to that question, the one that follows him everywhere, the one that journalists ask and fans debate and analysts circle around. Which country does he really belong to? Germany, where he was born and where his family first found safety? Georgia, where his blood runs and where his culture lives, and where a president placed an honor around his neck? Spain, where his heart beats, and where his career was built, and where a gym full of Argentinian brothers turned a displaced teenager into a world champion? The honest answer, the only accurate answer, is that he belongs to all 3, and to none of them in isolation. He is the product of displacement and determination, of 3 languages and 3 cultures, of a refugee family's sacrifice, and a young man's refusal to let that sacrifice be in vain. He is Georgian by blood, Spanish by heart, and a champion by sheer irresistible force of will. Born nowhere, champion everywhere. That is the Ilia Topuria story. And the remarkable thing, it is not finished yet. Not even close.